and welcome back to another episode of Deep Thoughts. And today we are talking about Kanata no Astra, or Astra Lost in Space, episode 11, Confession. But before we jump into this week's episode, I do have to give a big shout out to those of you who shared last week's video over on Twitter, namely at JName, at MizVich2, and at DarkFirePlayer4. Thanks so much for sharing last week's video over on Twitter, you guys, and if you too would like to have your name shouted out in next week's Astra video, which I believe will be the final episode of Astra, sad, but if you would like to get your name shouted out in that finale, then be sure to share this video around on the internet and then tag me at JoJo Talks Too Much, and I will be sure to shout your name out in next week's Kanata no Astra video. Now, with that said, I am going to tear into this week's episode. I have emotions about this week's episode. This one really took me on a roller coaster that I was not prepared to go on. Let's go ahead and begin talking about Sharce's mission. Now, Sharce, as we learned from last week's episode, is in fact the clone of the king, and the king, like all the other cloned or original people, turns out is a big-time douche. And anybody who would purposely make a clone just to use said clone as just organs in case something happens is a jerk. And that's basically what this group has done. And the king is no exception. At the very least, the king does have the excuse that, you know, he's the king and he wants his reign to continue. Still a douchey move. And when he clones Sarah later on, it's with the intent to make sure that his daughter is safe. So from that point of view, I get it. But he still made a clone of himself, Sharce, in order to save himself. So it's still greed. It's still totally driven by vanity and a constant quest for power. So no, the king is not by any stretch redeemed by making the Sarah clone. It's gonna be enough for me, Chief. And Sharce's devotion to this man, it just bums me out seeing how dedicated he was. Like, he believed that his upbringing was absolute, that everything that the king said is just the way that things are. And even that line from the king of like, I permit you to have friends, you may die with your companions, is like, first of all, kind of a badass villain line, but also like the douchiest thing one could say to their clone, I guess. I was gonna say their child, but I mean, he even says like, you are not my kid. Like, Sharce is not meant to be the king's son. He is the quote unquote son of a close noble, which is obviously false. And I don't even think he lived with the noble. I think he was just like in the castle alone. Sharce's upbringing is depressing and dark, more so than most of the characters in this show, because he was at least like made aware that he was a clone. Basically, Sharce is the one who is burdened with glorious purpose. Unfortunately, he is in fact aware what the purpose is, and it's obviously really warped his sense of reality. And I don't know, it broke my heart. And seeing him fight with everybody just breaks my heart even more, because he's so adamant in his own beliefs. And it's not even his beliefs, it's the beliefs forced upon him by his quote unquote dad. I know it's not his dad, but you know what I mean. His parental figure. And everyone's trying to tell him like, no, Sharce, if you never cared about us, you wouldn't have turned the black hole off consistently. But that's when it's revealed that he only did that because Ares was there, which I don't totally believe. Like, I know that that's what he said, but I don't really believe that. But still, like, he only did it because Ares was there, and he was dedicated to saving Ares because Ares is the clone of Sarah. And the backstory of Sharce and Sarah, the history between these two, Sharce has two moments of backstory in this episode, and both are supremely depressing. At the very least, Sharce's history with Sarah did have some happy moments, you know, and Sarah does come off as a really cool character for the very brief glimpse that we get of her in this week's episode, knowing that she knew about the clone thing and was totally against the king and wanted to help, but knew that she couldn't help Sharce, but at the very least, she could save Ares. And this is where we learn that Emma was aware that Ares was a clone, specifically of Sarah, because Emma, Ares' mom, was Sarah's handmaiden, I believe, or some sort of hand to Princess Sarah. and was always aware, and this that moment in particular got me. So Sarah is successful in saving baby Ares, which is super sweet, and we do see that Shars basically makes like a second secret mission to himself, that if his main mission is to just die for the king, become a vessel for the king, his second mission is to protect Sarah, to keep her safe. And of course, as soon as he said this, I was reminded that Sarah is super dead. So as soon as he said this, I'm like, okay, what's gonna happen? And this scene, even though I knew it was coming, really did surprise me. Like, I knew it was coming, I just wasn't expecting it to happen so suddenly. Like, he basically says, like, my secret mission was to protect her. And then they have this cute little scene, and then just some dude comes bolting out of the friggin', out of the trees and just shoves Sarah right off a friggin' cliff, which genuinely shocked me. Like, even though I knew it was coming, like I said, it was super obvious. Like, as soon as he's like, my mission is to protect Sarah, it was super obvious what was about to happen. But it still shocked me with how sudden it was. You know what I mean? Like, it was obvious it was going to happen, but I figured we'd get one more scene with Sarah and then she'd go. But all we get is her, like, a quick little cute moment. Like, not a full scene, just a little moment. And then she's just gone. And not even gone, like, you watch her fall. It is messed up. And I couldn't quite get a glimpse of who the assassin was. Although it is later kind of hinted at that whoever the assassin is, they did eventually find out who Emma was, and by connection who Ares was, and that's why Ares is with this group, even though she was never, like, known to be a clone. That's the reason she's there, is because they likely found out and then manipulated things to put her with the others so that they could stop any sort of line of succession. Because whoever these assassins are, they don't like the king. They want the king's line taken out. So of course, when they find out who Ares is, she's a potential line to the throne, so they want her removed. Totally makes sense. Like, absolutely, like, it adds up, which I super appreciate. I thought that was really well handled. And this leads to the whole, like, argument scene where Kanata is rightfully pissed off with Shars. Like I was furious with Shars. I was so mad at my boy Shars, because, like, I know that you are brainwashed into thinking that you never cared about these people, that you betrayed them and you didn't feel anything, but I know that's a lie. And all I could think of was that quote from Doctor Who.
You betrayed me. Betrayed my trust, you betrayed our friendship, you betrayed everything that I've ever stood for. You let me down! Do you think I care for you so little that betraying me would make a difference?
Because it's true, man. Like, no matter what Shars did in this scene, he would have had to have gone, like, horribly dark for me to ever not forgive him. Like, Shars is my boy. Shars is everybody's boy. Shars is a good boy. He's just manipulated, right? He is a product of his environment. And what I love about this show is the overall theme that you are not your upbringing. You are not your genes. You are you. And Shars was, like, trying so hard to be the king, to be his upbringing, even though he knew deep down that he did form a bond with these people, and just he was trying his best to refuse it, but in the end he had to realize that he had become his own individual at this point. And the show has that overarching theme of you are not where you are, you're where you're going. And that really is echoed hard in this scene. And this, of course, leads to Shars's supposed suicide. This scene gave me major Matt and Tai vibes from Digimon, actually, like with them like wrestling on the ground for a second, but basically Shars attempting to use the black hole device to send himself into space because he figured that he couldn't change. Like, Shars assumed that he wouldn't allow himself to change, or just couldn't be the person that these people, his friends, who he did admit were his friends and that he does love and care about, he said it himself, which I appreciate, that he just couldn't become the man who they wanted him to be. In that moment, that's what he thought anyway. And so he figured it would be easier to just remove himself from the equation so that they could get home and they wouldn't have to worry about him trying to stop them, or he wouldn't have to try to wrestle with that idea between being who he is now versus being who he was then. And that's some heavy stuff. But it's not too heavy, because immediately Kanata's like, nope, no, I refuse. Kobayashi, I don't believe in the Kobayashi Maru. And Kanata runs forward using the whole anti-grav boots, jumps over the friggin' thing. And this is where we get the Matt and Tai moment where they're fighting on the ground for a second. And they do save Shars, but it came at a cost. And I was gonna make it cost him an arm and a leg joke, but that doesn't quite work since it's only cost an arm. Yeah, so Kanata loses his arm like he's a friggin' Star Wars character. This was intense, man. The seiyus deserve huge credit, not just Kanata for really selling that painful scream, but also Shars like sobbing and trying to speak at the same time. The way it was delivered was brilliant. You totally bought that Shars is completely distraught at this point, knowing that this is kinda his fault, and just seeking forgiveness, but Kanata just kind of like being in and out of consciousness, going like, dude, no, you owe me big for this though, and when we get back, you're gonna be my right-hand man. And he says that lifting his stump. Kanata, my boy. Kanata is, or has to at least be, in the running for one of the best boys, not only of this season, but of the year. Kanata is such a good MC, such a good captain. Like, Kanata's gotta be up there. Same with Shars, same with all, like, this has gotta be, in my opinion, one of the best ensemble casts of this year. I'm gonna go, you know what, yeah, I'm gonna say year. But that's basically all my thoughts on this week's episode. Now, here comes the part where I have to give it a ranking, and I really wrestled with this because it really kept flip-flopping between an A rank and an S rank. Now, I haven't given anything an S rank yet, and I really don't want to hand these out often because I want S rank to be something special where you have, like, an episode has to be firing on all cylinders, no mistakes, and while I may regret it later, I have to give this episode an S rank. It is so good. Yeah, you know what? I'm pretty comfortable with that. This episode gets an S rank. I'm not giving these out often. These are like the tippity top best rank you can get from me, and this was such a phenomenal episode. I feel comfortable with that for sure. But hey, before we go, as always, I have to give a big shout out to the good folks over on Patreon, namely those in the Earl Grey tier: Calvin Atkinson, Crowbar of Irony, Dominic, Urza, Ginkotaku, No For Nothing, Maria Teresa, Mirth Mouser, Nye, Omnigaramond, Cell, Shadow Creative, Sipco Games, Somastan, Steven, Tristan, and Veridon. Thank you all so much for your continued support over on Patreon, and if you too would like to join the T Squadron, then be sure to check out the first link in the description, check out our Patreon page, and see all the cool rewards you can get over there, as well as access to our Patreon exclusive Discord. But on that note, everybody, that's going to be a video, so I hope you all enjoyed today's video, and if you did, then you've probably been on the internet long enough to know what to do already, so I ain't going to tell you, but I will say that it is appreciated. And if you're feeling stressed out today, you go have yourself a warm cup of tea, and I will talk to you all again real soon.